Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the first Friday lecture for the month of January in celebration of the 130th anniversary of lifelong learning and the liberal arts at the University of Chicago. Today's speaker is Kendall Sharp, and his title is Reading for Freedom and Equality in the Basic Program Curriculum. Please note that this presentation is also being recorded, and it will be available on the Graham School YouTube channel if you want to watch it later. Also, please be aware that you will not be able to unmute your microphones during this presentation as a courtesy to our speaker. You will be able to ask questions in the chat box. You can do so at any time during the presentation. Questions that you type in the chat box, Kendall will read and answer at the end of the lecture during our question and answer period. During the presentation itself, as I say, all will be muted except for our speaker. Kendall and I will be able to see your video, but won't be able to hear you. So if you choose to leave your video on or turn it off, it is at your discretion. Kendall's video will be spotlighted for the most part during the presentation. Consequently, the best way to view the lecture is to select speaker view instead of gallery view. Today's lecture is being sponsored by the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults at the University of Chicago's Graham School. My name is Zoe Eisenman, and I'm the Director of Academics at Graham and former chair of the basic program, and I continue as an instructor as well. Before I properly introduce our speaker, I'd like to say a few words about the basic program, the Graham School, and our upcoming courses and events. The basic program is a 4-year certificate program at the University of Chicago's Graham School of Continuing Studies. Graham offers an array of programs beside the basic program. Graham has been offering courses for lifelong learners since 1892, and this year we mark our 130th year of continuing education. Since 1946, we have offered our students a rigorous liberal arts curriculum based on the principle that there is no substitute for direct engagement with big ideas in their original texts. Through focused discussion, our classes provide direct encounters with some of the great works of classical and Western culture in a dedicated community of adult learners led by experienced University of Chicago educated instructors. Most of our classes still take place remotely, although this year we are offering a small number of courses in person downtown. Winter quarter courses are well underway as of this week. Registration for spring courses will open in about 4 weeks, so keep your eyes peeled for them. Our next First Friday lecture will happen on February 3rd, and the speaker will be Joseph Aloulis. Joe's title will be Publius, Tocqueville, and Burke on Federalism, Democracy, and Revolution, Lessons for Our Time. The First Friday lecture series will continue monthly throughout the academic year. This quarter, we have 3 installments of our robust series of basic program movie nights. The next one is on Friday, January 20th at 6 p.m. The movie we'll watch in advance and discuss that night is 2001: A Space Odyssey. This event will be hosted by basic program student Miguel Marzana. Thanks in advance, Miguel. You can find out more about the basic program movie nights on the movie nights website in Canvas. As I mentioned before, this presentation is being recorded. The recording will be available to current and former students on the Graham School YouTube channel early next week. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, Kendall Sharp. Kendall Sharp is the Cyril O'Hoole Chair of the Basic Program of Liberal Education for Adults, where he's also an instructor. He holds a PhD from the Committee on Social Thought and a BA from the college at the University of Chicago. Formerly, he was assistant professor in the Department of Classical Studies at the University of Western Ontario, and he has also taught at DePaul University in the history, the University of Illinois Chicago in classics, and in the College in Humanities. He rejoined the basic program in 2019, having last served on the staff from 1999, having trouble with nines today, 1999 to 2000. His research and publishing focus on Plato's dialogues as literary expressions of the philosophical life. His teaching has included Greek and Latin languages, classics in translation, literature, philosophy, and history, and both classical mythology and ancient Greek science. His current interests include freedom and equality as themes in classical Greek texts. Now it is my pleasure to turn things over to Kendall.
Thank you, Zoe. And after you stop your screen share, I will start mine. I saw a chat note that someone was having problems with audio, so I'm not sure if that's it was Ray Lucchese. So I hope everyone can hear us. I'm going to start my screen share now. There we are. We'll play it from the start. I believe I am not muted. Okay, very good. Today, I want to look at passages in 3 of the authors in the basic program curriculum where the text relies on the audience to possess actively the democratic values of freedom and equality. The 3 authors are Sophocles in his play Antigone, Herodotus in his history, and Aristotle in his politics and the book on ethics that we call the Nicomachean Ethics. Except for the politics, these are texts we read in the first year of the basic program 4-year curriculum. Since that curriculum is for the purpose of liberal education, and liberal indicates a politically free person, it will be interesting to see exactly how these texts engage political freedom as a theme. Indeed, how these texts, as I hope to show you, are substantially constituted by the expectation the author has that the original audience not only shares these values, but clings to them self-consciously, jealously, and indeed existentially. The existential aspect shows up in the persistent concern about insurrection as a threat to freedom and equality. The best way to approach this topic is to look at these 3 texts in reverse order, or in the reverse order to which we meet them in the curriculum. So I'll start with Aristotle, then move backward to Herodotus, and then we'll end with Sophocles' Antigone. If we do this, it will render our themes and Sophocles' textual strategies in Antigone as salient instead of camouflaged. The reason we should pay attention to freedom and equality as themes in these books is because these books, in fact, all books by classical Greek authors, are literally the source for full political freedom and full political equality. No other society practiced freedom and equality to the extent the classical Greeks did, and also left behind books as testament and evidence. As I argued 13 months ago in my last First Friday lecture in December 2021, there is a very great difference between Western civilization and the civilization of the ancient Greeks and Romans. Western civilization arose out of feudalism and rejected freedom and equality for 14 centuries, with the exception of the republican governments that appeared in Italy for a few centuries, also in Geneva and in the Dutch Republic, and of course in France after their revolution. The founders of the United States distinguished between themselves and Western Europe and self-consciously adopted the ancient classical values of freedom and equality. If you would like to review the argument about why the ancient Greeks are not part of Western civilization, that lecture lives still on the Graham YouTube channel. What we can learn from the Greeks about these themes is that, unlike so often in Western political theory, in the ancient Greek system, freedom and equality mutually support and reinforce each other. In the ancient Greek system, one man's freedom does not at all come at the expense of another's. In fact, the only way for all citizens in an ancient Greek city-state to be free is for them to be equal. Finally, the themes of freedom and equality can lead us to see what the Greeks called politics as truly the highest form of human communal life, and indeed the only way for a community to govern itself. Let us turn first to Aristotle's Politics, and to a passage that is truly extraordinary and overlooked. The passage comes from Book 2, but we must prepare first for our target passage by reviewing a couple of other passages and the basic political concepts in Aristotle's system. For Aristotle, a city-state, that is to say, a polis, is self-ruled when a polis is self-ruled when its citizens rule it collectively and according to a constitution. The word for constitution and citizenship, it's the same, politeia, which is also the title of Plato's book that we call the Republic. Citizens would not be politically equal nor free if one of them or a subset of them could lord it over the others, So, according to Aristotle, the function of a citizen is to rule and be ruled in turn. In Book 3, Chapter 1, he writes, quote, "On this basis, it is clear who is the citizen, for we can now say that whoever is permitted to take part in office, deliberative or judicial, is a citizen of this polis." Here, Aristotle means that a full citizen is eligible, that is, has the freedom to sit in the legislative assemblies that make law and policy, and also the judicial assemblies, like the one Socrates faced, where the jury of your peers can number between 500 and 2,000. In both cases, matters are decided by majority vote. Majority vote, of course, ensures political equality because each citizen gets only one and precisely one vote. As a citizen of an ancient democracy, you could attend either of these assemblies at will. It was patriotic for you to do so and your civic duty. But that is not all there was to politics, for there were also leaders, the people who held what we call magistracies, but Aristotle calls office, arche. How can you be equal if you have to follow the lead of someone who holds an office that you do not hold? Aristotle has an answer. He writes in Book 6, quote, "The basic principle of the democratic politeia, the constitution or form of citizenship, is freedom. For it is usually said that only in this politeia do citizens have freedom, for it's said that every democracy aims at it. And one piece of freedom is being ruled and ruling in turn. For democratic justice is having it equally on the basis of number and not on the basis of worthiness. This being what's just, the whole mass is necessarily authoritative, and whatever the majority judges best, this is what's final, and this is what's just. For it's said that each of the citizens ought to have it equally." What I want you to take away from this is the short list of key concepts. Political deliberation is called boule, office or rule is called arche, and citizens alternate holding office or ruling with periods of being out of office and being ruled. This rule and be ruled principle, Aristotle calls reciprocal equality. We will see these echoed in Herodotus and Sophocles in a few minutes. Now, let's proceed to our target passage in Aristotle. Here, it is not too much to say that he is theorizing what are now called diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. If I interpret this target passage correctly, Aristotle is arguing that the experience of politics on the basis of equality takes citizens who are originally dissimilar socially and makes them similar in a new way, the political way. In this passage, Aristotle argues that a polis is made up of people who are not similar to each other, or homoioi in the Greek, but who differ in kind, in eidos. It means a category. They may be politically equal, Aristotle says, but they are not like each other. This is not a weakness, nor even an inconvenience, however, precisely because a polis takes all kinds of people to exist. For Aristotle, quote, "Reciprocal equality preserves cities," or another way of translating the verb I translate as preserves, you could say keeps them safe. It's a word they use when they're talking about what we call national security or stability. Let me say right off that the text of this passage that we're going to look at in a second, it seems to editors and translators to be uncertain. However, I think they feel uncertain because they would be too surprised at what the manuscripts actually read. So they start editing it until it says something else. I think this textually fraught passage does say what the manuscripts say it says. If it means what it says, then Aristotle is saying that what makes a community truly political is that it comes out of persons of different kinds, but through the experience and process of politics, especially political equality, they become approximately similar or roughly similar. As you know, if you're in the basic program, Aristotle usually needs one or two readings. So let's just look at the passage in question in full first. then we'll walk through the argument by re-examining it in pieces. Here is that passage. Takes 2 slides. Quote, "A polis comes not only from a number of people, but of people who differ in kind or category. For a polis does not come from people who are alike. Things which a unity must come from differ in kind. For this reason, reciprocal equality keeps or preserves or keeps safe polis, that's the plural, just as I said earlier in the ethics, since indeed that is necessary among the free and equal, for it's not possible for everybody to rule at once, but only on an annual basis or some other term of time. It results that everybody rules in the same way as if shoemakers and carpenters were to change their ways, and not the same fellows were the shoemakers and carpenters. But since this latter way is better as concerns the community that is political, that means a polis, it's clear that it's better for the same people always to rule if possible, but where it's not possible because the people are equals in nature. And at the same time, it's just, whether it's good or bad, for everybody to have a share of it. It approximates everybody ruling for equals to defer or yield in turn, but to be roughly alike or similar when they come out of office. For some rule while others are ruled in turn, just as if they become different people. In the same way, among office holders, some hold one office while others hold others. It is precisely because people are, quote, different in kind that, quote, reciprocal equality secures polis. Although people are all different in kind, in a political community or polis, they nevertheless are each and all of them free and equal. The problem with everybody being free is that, properly speaking, each should rule, or if not rule, then at least be free from rule by others. The problem with everybody being equal is that it is impossible for each and every one of them to rule at the same time. The solution to it being impossible for every equal citizen to rule is for them to take turns ruling and being ruled, and to use limited terms of office. As Aristotle says, quote, "And in this way it results for everyone to rule, just as if the shoemakers and carpenters were to have changed ways and were to be not always the same shoemakers and carpenters." Aristotle says that in reciprocal equality, that is, when equals reciprocate, they alternately defer to each other. He says the political community approximates, literally what he says is it imitates. It approximates everyone rule when equals take turns deferring to each other. Quote, "It imitates everybody ruling for equals to defer in turn." And the Greek word for defer is akain, and that'll come up again. Aristotle has his eye on the deference here, not on the ruling. And he continues his sentence thus: "But to be roughly similar or alike when they come out of office." Close quote. After engaging in politics on the basis of equality, office holders rotate out of office, and all of you have the same experience of coming down a notch. Your office was temporary, and the point all along was for you to rotate back out of it, and all you originally dissimilar citizens get reduced back to your mutual numerical equality, but not just reduced to it. This rotating into and back out of office creates a new space, the political space, the realm of public affairs, where now you all actually do become not just equal, but also similar. Now you are positively bonded by your numerical equality to the system and to each other, and you become qualitatively similar in a new way. Now, I sort of hope you agree with my interpretation, but I sort of hope you don't. As a teacher in the basic program, I hope your standards for close reading have you noticing that for the key part of my interpretation so far, I have had to make a few words do a whole lot of work. You might say I've squeezed a curious amount of juice from a small lemon. First, let me say that due to the state of Aristotle's texts and some aspects of his writing style, we do have sometimes to squeeze more juice out of the lemon than the lemon actually has inside. Second, though, in the present passage, he points us to another passage in another book, namely the Ethics. And there I think we can secure this interpretation a little better. So let's back up a bit, take a running start back at our passage and leap over to the Ethics to see how that helps. I'm going to paraphrase, taking it from the top. Because the community is political, it has political roles. These roles are over and above and beside your other social roles, whether you're a cobbler or a carpenter. As roles, these political roles are funny because people switch in and out of them. Yet it is this switching, according to Aristotle, that secures the existence of the polis. He does not explicitly say that the experience of rotating into and then back out of office is what causes people to subordinate themselves to their polis and so secure it. But he does refer his reader to the Ethics in a passage where he discusses reciprocal equality. In that passage, he does say explicitly that the experience of reciprocal equality creates gratitude or charis. This is the spirit of giving back, of reciprocating a favor, which is also charis in Greek, when you feel another person has benefited you or given to you. The feeling of grace or gratitude results from experiencing reciprocity. It's gravy, it's value added. It's this idea that, I submit, makes explicit sense of the difficult passage from the Politics. Now, here is the passage from the Ethics. Quote, "But in associations that are based on mutual exchange, the just, in this sense, constitutes the bond that holds the association together. That is, reciprocity in terms of a proportion and not in terms of exact equality in the return. For it is the reciprocal return of what is proportional to what one has received that holds the state or the polis together. People seek either to requite evil with evil, for otherwise their relation is regarded as that of slaves, or good with good, for otherwise there is no mutual contribution. And it is by their mutual contribution that men are held together. That is the reason why the polis erects a sanctuary of the graces in a prominent place in order to promote reciprocal exchange. For that is the proper province of gratitude. We should return our services to one who has done us a favor, and at another time take the initiative in doing him a favor." Close quote. Well, thank you, Aristotle. Aristotle wrote his Politics probably in the 330s BC, after the death of Plato, but before the death of Alexander the Great. About 100 years earlier, in roughly 430 BC, we don't know precisely, Herodotus published his history, which we call the history of the Persian Wars, although it contains much else. It contains, for example, a lot of history of the city-state, of the polis form of government in both Athens and Sparta. Herodotus is at pains to emphasize and glorify the values of freedom and equality, both as they pertain to the democratic government at Athens, but also as they pertain to the oligarchic government at Sparta. An ancient Greek oligarchy, like at Sparta, is very much like a democracy in modern terms, except it applies to fewer people and not at all to the poor. So the same rules apply. Herodotus treats freedom and equality in two ways, as external and as internal phenomena. As an external proposition, he considers the freedom of a whole polis versus the domination of a king who is building an empire by conquering smaller powers. Externally, freedom is opposed to subjugation, and the question is whether the smaller powers can preserve their freedom. As an internal proposition, Herodotus treats freedom as the opposite of government by tyranny. The opposition has the corollary of equality versus inequality. If a tyrant seizes control of a Greek city-state, he sets himself up as superior to the rest of the citizens, and he operates outside the law. Let's do external freedom first. In the run-up to the battle for the pass at Thermopylae, King Xerxes asks a Spartan exile whether the Greeks will actually stand their ground against the vastly larger Persian force. He asks, quote, "Now tell me this, whether the Greeks will stand their ground and raise hands against me," close quote. The Spartan replies that the Spartans, at least, would stand their ground no matter how many enemy troops they face. Xerxes laughs at this. He doesn't believe it. He ridicules the idea because he cannot imagine why such men would fight. He reasons, quote, how would 1,000 be able to withstand so large an army, or even 10, or even 50,000, if they are all free equally and not under the rule of one man? For if they were under the rule of one man, the way we do it, that's Persia, he means, they would become better beyond their own natures because they fear him. And they would go against more men, though being fewer, under compulsion of the whip. But abandoned to freedom, they would not do either of these things. So notice here that Xerxes is making a claim about fighting under compulsion that matches Aristotle's claim about reciprocal equality, that it makes you more, the whole is more than the sum of the parts. The Spartan proceeds to explain to Xerxes that Spartans are ordinary fighters when they fight singly one-on-one, but it's a totally different story when they fight as a unit. He says, quote, the Lacedaemonians, that's the Spartans, when fighting one-on-one are worse than no men, but in a group they're the best of all men. For although they're free, they are not free in all respects, for they have law over them as a master, a despotes, whom they fear more still by much than your men fear you. At any rate, they do what he commands. And he commands always the same thing, and disallows them to flee any mass of men from battle, but to remain in formation and to win or die. Close quote. You know how the battle turned out. The 300 Spartans fought and died to a man. So also did the Thespians, though, although they're not as famous for doing it as the Spartans. It was a Greek virtue, not just a Spartan one. It becomes a part of the history of freedom, it becomes a part of the history of freedom for autocrats simply to disbelieve that free societies will fight for their freedom even against overwhelming numbers. From Xerxes to Adolf Hitler to Vladimir Putin, autocrats misconceive free and equal peoples. When an autocrat's army fights only under the threat of being whipped, free and equal citizens organize themselves with self-discipline, because fighting for their own freedom and equality. Now let's go to internal government. Herodotus links the prosperity of Athens in commerce and at war to their development of democratic values and institutions. They were not always a democracy, but they had to develop the institutions and values for it over time. Herodotus tells this story in Book 5, where he fills in much of Athens's history before the Persian War began in the 490s. It's a story that spans 120 years and begins and ends with insurrection. Further, both insurrections were put down by the common people, the demos. Herodotus characterizes both insurrections as threats not to democracy, but to freedom and equality. The democracy really only rose as a result of the second attempted coup by a would-be tyrant. Let's look at this historical narrative and see the terms Herodotus uses to frame it. For Herodotus, it's a story of Athens preserving its freedom and self-rule from tyranny, which is characterized as subjugation of the free and equal citizenry to one man. Over the course of 4 generations, the Athenians preserved their freedom, lost it, and then regained it. First, we start in 631 BC. A wealthy young man with deep family connections named Creon became prominent by winning at the Olympics. We do not know his event. Now, it may seem weird to you today, but in ancient Athens, an Olympic victory could set you up for a life of celebrity, wealth, and even political power. Olympic athletes tended to come from the few wealthy extended families who had oligarchic sympathies. This fellow Creon plotted a coup d'etat against his fellow Athenians, which he tried to accomplish in a way that was fairly typical, that is, by seizing the Acropolis. The Acropolis was home not only to temples, but also to the city treasury, and more to the point, it was the high ground, the dominant strong point for defending the polis against attack. If you wanted to conquer any polis, you had to seize its acropolis. So the only chance of success, if you were going to overthrow it, was to start out by doing so. Obviously, if you fail, you're screwed because there's no escape route downward. Chilon wanted to become tyrant of Athens, and Herodotus tells us literally that Chilon, quote, grew his hair long at a tyranny, meaning, and it's a metaphor, that he plumed himself or put on airs, that he was better than his fellow citizens, and, quote, attaching to himself a political gang of guys his own age, he attempted to seize the Acropolis. But unable to prevail, he sat as a suppliant at the image of Athena in a temple. The government prevailed and executed the insurrectionists. Archaeologists recently found what may be the skeletons of the insurrectionists still manacled and buried in a mass grave south of Athens. Thucydides tells us that Chilon and his brother got away, leaving their followers to be executed. Thucydides further adds the detail that it was the common people, or the demos, who came in from their farms to besiege the insurrectionists until they sat suppliant. Quote, when the Athenians heard of it, they came to the rescue from their fields against them with the whole people, pandeme, and sat down and began a siege, close quote. The idea here is that tyranny deprives the citizens of freedom and equality. The tyrant comes to power, or tries to come to power, and to maintain power outside of the law. So, in relation to citizens who are equal to each other by law, he seeks to put himself above the law, and therefore above them all. Because their political assemblies no longer, under a tyranny, control governmental affairs, the tyrant does that. The citizens are said to be no longer free, indeed, to be slaves. Now, please note that the Chilon affair happened long before the Athenians established their democracy. But they nevertheless had a constitutional polis government of the type we'd call an oligarchy. An oligarchy in a Greek polis is still the opposite of a tyranny because one man does not run the whole show, even if the less well-to-do are cut out of power. This was the case at Sparta and Corinth, both with ancient reputations for opposing tyranny in their own and other cities. Back to our historical narrative. Herodotus mentions that Solon had reformed the Athenians' constitution in the generation after the Chilon affair. Solon then went abroad for 10 years to avoid the temptation of becoming a tyrant. And I believe year one students just read that passage this week about Solon. Herodotus also tells how the constitution of Solon was done in by tyranny in the next generation, as an Athenian named Pisistratus came to power after 2 failed attempts and established a tyranny. Herodotus says that the tyranny of Pisistratus was actually not so bad, because he voluntarily respected most laws. His kids, though, were another question. After Pisistratus died in 528, his son Hippias succeeded him, and Hippias was more despotic. The Delphic oracle began telling the Spartans to, quote, free the Athenians from the tyranny of Hippias, and this they did eventually after a few years. Note here the characterization of the people as not free when governed by one man. Certain Athenians bribed the Delphic priestess, quote, to propose to any Spartans who came to consult the oracle on a private or a public errand, to propose to them the project of freeing the Athenians. Similarly, Herodotus speaks of freedom when the Spartan king Cleomenes follows through on the oracle. Herodotus writes, quote, Cleomenes came to the city together with those of the Athenians who wanted to be free, and he besieged the tyrants after they barricaded themselves within the Pelasgic wall, close quote. This set the stage for the foundation of the democracy. Herodotus says right after the tyrants were abolished, 2 politicians competed for supremacy, Isagoras and Cleisthenes, and they're on the slide from 510 to 508. Isagoras was getting the better of Cleisthenes, so Cleisthenes did something radical. Although an aristocrat, he's probably the one who was bribing Delphi. He made common cause with the common people, the demos. Herodotus writes, quote, when Cleisthenes was losing, He took the common people into his party, or possibly you should translate that as he associated himself with them. The word in question amounts to the same expression Herodotus uses of Chylon. Here he says Cleisthenes took the common people into his party, while Chylon, he said, as we saw, attached to himself a political gang of guys his own age. So the word is the same. Herodotus goes on to say that Cleisthenes, quote, became stronger than his opponents, close quote, and he was able to give the constitution over to the common people, even, as Aristotle tells us, making new citizens out of some slaves and some, but not all, immigrants. But soon the Spartans regretted making the Athenians free, so they re-invaded, aiming to set Isagoras up now as tyrant. This story is more complicated than I'm making it today, but Cleomenes forced Cleisthenes and hundreds of his supporters into, let's see here, there we go. Cleomenes forced Cleisthenes and hundreds of his supporters into exile, and then with a small army, he, quote, tried to do away with the council, the boule, and entrusted the government to 300 partisans of Isagoras. The council resisted and refused to obey, close quote, so the insurrectionists seized the Acropolis. This did not go well, as the common people rose up immediately, just as they had done 120 years earlier. Herodotus says, quote, the rest of the Athenians made common cause and besieged them for 2 days, close quote, after which the Spartans lost stomach for the task. The Athenians let Cleomenes go, but, quote, bound and executed, close quote, his small army. Cleomenes was not done, though, and he tried next to punish, quote, punish the demos of the Athenians, and he intended to install Isagoras as tyrant, close quote. But the expedition fell apart when his allies started reflecting. So remember, Sparta and Corinth have a tradition of opposing tyrants. His allies started reflecting that it was wrong, just immoral, unjust, to install a tyrant anywhere. Athens then retaliated against some of these allies, such that the new democratic government emerged supreme on the military field. Herodotus credits this emergence. Herodotus credits this emergence to the democratic values of freedom and equality among the citizens, specifically as embodied in the principle called isegoria, which kind of means equality and freedom at the same time. The iso element means equality, and you see it in the isosceles triangle. And the egor, or agor element, it means public, that is to say political speech. And it's also related to the word for the marketplace, the agora. What is equal is that the right belongs to all citizens. What is free is that they are all equally free to speak at the assemblies, such as the boule, the council, where laws are deliberated about and voted on. Look now at how Herodotus sums up his historical narrative. He lays all Athenian success at the feet of freedom and equality. Quote, it is clear, not just on one point, but in every way, that isegoria, equality and freedom of speech, is a weighty factor. If even the Athenians at war were better than none of their neighbors when under a tyrant, but became first by far after getting rid of their tyrants. So these things show that when under subjection, they used to slack off as if working for a slave master. But under freedom, each was motivated to get the job done for his own self, close quote. Let's look now at the Antigone. In this play, Sophocles judges the autocratic government of Thebes on the stage by the values of the contemporary democratic audience of Athenian citizens sitting around the stage. Basically, the Theban government dramatized on stage, set in the mythic past, is shown to generate disaster because it is not based on freedom and equality, but on domination and hierarchy. I will show you in a minute the language that the characters utter that would be recognized by the audience as specifically democratic. First, though, I'd like to talk a bit about this original audience. as well as the situation of the original performance of the Antigone, that is. This will be a good example of how historical context can illuminate a close reading of the text. The play Antigone was composed by Sophocles to be produced in 441 at the civic festival called the Greater Dionysia. Let me put this year quickly into context. In 508, the Athenians adopted democracy for their form of government. In 490, Persia invaded under Darius, but was repulsed decisively. 10 years later, in 480, Persia invaded again, repelled this time in large part by the efforts of the Athenian navy at the Battle of Salamis. The Athenian navy had not been a factor before. Because it became so important, the poorest of the free men at Athens who manned the oars of the great warships became involved and important in the government. In the years separating Salamis in 480 and Sophocles' Antigone in 441, the government at Athens became yet more democratic, and the city itself grew richer and more powerful after leading the Greeks in winning the war. In 447, construction began on the Parthenon on the Acropolis. So that brings us to 441, when the play was produced at the civic festival called the Greater Dionysia. Dionysus was felt to be a very democratic god, and a bit of reflection on your personal experience might teach you how the god of wine could be associated with freedom and equality of a sort. The audience members attended in a sort of official capacity, official, that is, because they were citizens, and it was a civic festival. The seating was arranged in the same format as the seating for the political assemblies. On this slide, you can see on the left the Theater of Dionysus on the slope of the Acropolis. On the right, the place of political assembly called the Pnyx, which is it's nearby the Acropolis. Sophocles will have had to apply to a committee, the committee who selected the plays that would be performed at that year's Dionysia. Consequently, there was a high level of social control over the content of Greek tragedies. The Greater Dionysia was a civic festival through and through, from the plays on the stage to the citizens in their seats. If you've read 2 or 3 Greek tragedies, by which I mean Greek tragic dramas, you will have noticed the tendency for the characters to include kings and rulers of various sorts. This might raise an odd question, given the historical context of the plays. The Athenians were hyper-conscious that their government was a democracy because all of them participated directly in it. They all participated to varying degrees in politics. A quick word about terminology. The English words civic and civil are linked to one of Latin's words for a city, civitas. Latin also gives us urban from the word urbs, like in the motto of the city of Chicago. But the word civitas denotes the city from the viewpoint of the citizens. Indeed, the word civitas is built on the Latin word for citizen, civis, or civis. The V is pronounced as a W. The tas, the TAS ending on civitas, turns the word for citizen into an abstract quality, citizenness, if you will. In Greek, by contrast to Latin, the word for citizen comes from the word for city, polis. A citizen is a polites, and when you act in your capacity as a citizen, you are said to be doing politics, ta politica. The abstract is politeia, which corresponds to Latin civitas. What it meant to do politics was to operate on the basis of freedom and equality among your fellow citizens to govern yourselves by discussion. There was no one ranking above you motley citizens to run the city, and all sovereign decisions were up to you as a group. Consequently, power was transacted not by one citizen or party dominating others and bossing them around, but consensually by persuasive speech and majority vote. In Antigone, Sophocles dramatizes the consequences of autocracy as compared with democracy. In the figure of Creon, Sophocles depicts an autocrat who makes a series of policy decisions not in the mode of a democratic leader of democratic citizens, but like an autocrat. In the words of other characters, Sophocles evaluates Creon's monarchy by the values not of autocracy, but of democracy. And he shows that Creon's commitment to autocratic values induces him to the tragedy that costs him the lives of his wife, son, and future daughter-in-law. In fact, if Thebes had had the governmental institutions of the democratic sort, like at Athens, Creon could never have committed his tragic error. The tragedy of the play happens precisely because the government institutions on the stage are not like those of the citizens of Athens in the audience. The play begins the day after Thebes has repulsed a coup d'etat. Creon has only just now become king, succeeding his nephew, one of Antigone's brothers, who died the day before, defending the city from an outside army led by his own brother trying to retake the kingship. The brothers killed each other. As the play opens, Antigone wants to bury her bad brother. She soon gets caught in the act of doing so. In her one conversation with Creon, she says that everyone in the polis approves her act. Indeed, they would say so, but for fear of the king. She says, quote, "A king is fortunate in many ways, and most that he can think and speak at will," close quote. Of course, the Athenian citizens sitting in the audience could think and speak at will, thanks to the principle of isegoria, or freedom and equality of speech. In the next episode of the play, Creon is confronted by his son, Haemon. Haemon is in a bind because he is engaged to marry Antigone, and he's furious at his father. But since his father is king, he makes his approach with tact and delicacy. Creon starts the conversation by enunciating a view of government and right and wrong that will have struck the citizen audience as diametrically opposed to Athenian democracy. Creon says, quote, "But he who crosses law or forces it or hopes to dictate orders to the rulers shall never have a word of praise from me. The man the state has put in place must have obedient hearing to his least command when it is right and even when it's not. There is no greater crime than disobedience," close quote. Here we see Creon echo in earnest the remark Antigone had made bitterly when she said a king is different than other people because he can do and say what he pleases. By implication, other people cannot do and say what they please. Other people lack this freedom. Here, Creon draws the further implication that other folks must actively heed and do what the king says. He need not persuade a majority of his fellow citizens because the citizens are not his equals. Haemon begins tactfully, but he is focused and takes no long time getting to his point. As his father's son, he says, he has a duty to be alert to threats to his father's power. And he has detected such a threat in the grumblings of the general public. He says, quote, "Because I am your son, I must keep watch on all men's doings where it touches you, their speech, and most of all, their discontents. Your presence frightens any common man from saying things you would not care to hear. But in dark corners, I have heard them. I've heard them say how the whole town is grieving for this girl. This is the undercover speech in town," close quote. Less delicately, Haemon moves straight now to oppose the values of autocracy, the values Creon had enunciated in the previous scene. Haemon says, quote, "So do not have one mind and one alone, that only your opinion can be right. Whoever thinks that he alone is wise, his eloquence, his mind are above the rest. Come the unfolding, it shows his emptiness. A man, though wise, should never be ashamed of learning more and must not be too rigid." Notice Haemon's strategy. Notice that Haemon is also advertising for continuing education, but notice Haemon's strategy. He does not advocate for Antigone's position directly. Rather, he advocates the moderate and limited position, only that sometimes other people can have the right idea. This does not go over well with his father. These words are not the path to Creon's heart. There follows a passage of what we call stickomythia, That's where two characters debate back and forth rapidly, with each character speaking only one line at a time, responding closely and dynamically to each other. Creon starts, "You don't think she is sick with that disease?" Hymen says, "Your fellow citizens maintain she's not." Creon says, "Is the town to tell me how I ought to rule?" Hymen, "Now there you speak just like a boy yourself." Creon, "Am I to rule by other mind than mine?" Hymen, "No city is property of a single man." Close quote. Of course, a king might think the city is his property. So here, Hymen is pushing an egalitarian principle. From this point forward, things go from bad to worse. Creon has sentenced Antigone to death. Hymen fails to talk him out of it. And now Creon consults with the ancient seer Tiresias. Tiresias tells him directly that the city now suffers religious pollution because of Creon's policy against burying enemy corpses. And the birds are bringing gobbets of human flesh to the altars that are meant for decent sacrifice. Tiresias has an effect on Creon, but Creon sends the prophet away angrily. After the seer exits the stage, Creon begins to see the error of his ways. This is an unexpected moment in the play. It is unexpected for the villain simply, I should say, to see the error of his ways like a normal person, and with time left in the play to correct his conduct. After talking to Tiresias, Creon comes to see that Hymen was right and Antigone before him. Creon reacts by changing his mind and dramatically ordering his men to hurry to prevent the self-execution of Antigone. But before he utters the word to reverse his earlier order, Creon converses with the chorus leader. It is this conversation that reveals to the audience the process of Creon's change of mind. The terms the chorus leader uses effectively give Creon a quick tutorial in democratic institutions. These terms will have been immediately recognized by the original audience as the terms they used themselves to discuss their own self-governments. You will recognize these terms from our earlier discussion of Aristotle and Herodotus. The chorus leader begins by reminding Creon that Tiresias has never before been wrong when he gave counsel to the city. Creon replies, "I also know this, and my mind is torn. To yield is dreadful, but to stand against him, Tiresias, and shatter my spirit in doom is dreadful too." Now look at the language of the next exchange. The chorus leader says, "Now you must seek good counsel and take advice." And the word for counsel and advice, the translator breaks it into two. It's a single word, eobulia. Creon replies, "What must I do? Speak, and I shall obey." Close quote. The word for obey or for yield, see, how did I put it on the slide? I went back and forth. To yield, yes, good. The word for yield, you will recognize from Aristotle. It is akathane, from where Aristotle says equals, there we are. It is akathane, from where Aristotle says equals defer or yield to each other. Remember that for Aristotle, rotating out of office is what guarantees equality in the city and, quote, saves the city or preserves it. Now look at the word for counsel and advice, eubulia. You remember from Herodotus that the boule was the council and the council chamber that had to be overthrown if you wanted to set up a tyranny. In Aristotle, the deliberative offices are one half of a citizen's function, and the word for the deliberative offices is bouleutique. Finally, the word for obey that Creon uses is special too. Obey is probably not the best English word to translate this Greek word, because in the political context, this word concerns really the concept of persuasion and gaining someone's consent, as you do in consensual government. In the political context, it means, I'll go along with it. You've persuaded me. It is the central act of collective deliberation, persuading and being persuaded. gaining and giving one's consent. It is the exact opposite of obeying at the end of the crack of a whip, as Xerxes puts it. Back to the plot of the Antigone, and also back to the audience of democratic Athens. Creon's change of mind comes too late. His prior commands have initiated a chain of consequences that, autocrat though he is, he cannot control. His son, Hymen, arrives at the cave where Antigone is to be sealed away to starve to death, only to find that she has just hanged herself. So Hymen kills himself. All this bloody action happens off stage, but the audience learns of it through a messenger who comes on stage to report it. The messenger has the last pro-democratic, anti-autocratic lines in the play. He says that as Hymen breathed his last, embracing the corpse of Antigone, quote, "So he has made it very clear to men that to reject good counsel, abulia, is a crime." We might feel a bit underwhelmed by these words. We might find them a bit anticlimactic, but not, I think, if we view them from the context of ancient politics and the perspective of the audience. One final point about the performance aspect of Antigone. Let's back up a moment. Let's back up to the moment right after Creon sees the light and changes his mind about Antigone. Remember that he was talking to the chorus leader. After this discussion, Creon leaves the stage, and there is a choral ode featuring the chorus singing a song. It is not just any song. Compare its content to the earlier choruses, and you'll see what stands out is that this chorus is devoted to Dionysus, the god of the theater and special god of democracy. The chorus is inviting Dionysus to come, quote, with healing step, where the word for healing actually means purifying or cleansing of defilement, guilt, or pollution. If you've taken year 2, autumn quarter of the basic program, you will have read the play by Euripides named The Bacchae, and you will know what a mixed blessing it is when the god Dionysus comes to town. He has a very destructive way of purifying and cleansing the polis. You will also have read Aristotle's work Poetics, where he introduces the concept of the dramatic catharsis, the purgation of the tragic emotions of pity and fear. Well, here, Sophocles uses the same word in its adjectival form, katharsios, for what the chorus call for from Dionysus. This chorus is followed by the messenger with the bad news that I've already related. Dionysus may come to save your city, but the life of no particular individual is guaranteed over any other. Dionysus makes us all alike, reduces us to a basis of similarity, no matter the cost. Woe to any mere mortal who puts on airs or who grows their hair long, that they stand above their fellow mortals, especially when those fellow mortals are one's fellow citizens, one's free and equal fellow citizens. To conclude, we have observed in all 3 of our authors how the democratic values of freedom and equality are put into practice when citizens take turns with their fellow citizens, yielding and submitting to each other on a voluntary and consensual basis. These values and this practice are treated by our writers as essential to the self-government of the polis by its own citizens, and as opposed to the kind of submission based on inequality practiced by the subjects of an autocrat. Further, 2 of our authors, Herodotus and Sophocles, treat insurrection as a threat not just to the government in power, but to the freedom and equality of the whole citizen body. Insurrectionists set themselves up as superior to their fellow citizens, rather than submitting to them and to the Constitution. Finally, a different pair of our authors, Aristotle and Herodotus, argue that the practice of freedom and equality and of submission to constitutional or legal roles actually strengthens the polis as a whole and redounds to the benefit of the individual citizen. In the ancient Greek city-state, freedom and equality rendered the citizen body as a whole that was greater than the sum of its parts. Thank you very much. All right, so let's see. Oh, I'm doing my my own questions and answers today. So let's have a look at let's see, where should I start? 1223. Sheila Barrett says, yes, Greek freedom and equality was for Greek male citizens only. Yes, that's a topic I addressed in the old First Friday lecture, the one from December 2021. Xiao Bin Yang says, it's okay then. Nowadays, maybe more than half of the world, people still under non-democratic governance. All too true. Ezra Serkand asks, is not there a conflation at work with the homology of the Greek polis and their homoios and the modern, quote, liberal state and liberal citizen? Let me think about this. See, what exactly do you mean? Yeah, so liberal and liberalism, those English, the modern words, that is a further develop. That is not ancient Greek freedom and equality. Not exactly. Let's see. Ben Yang asks, are human intelligence and intellectual gifts really equal? I assume you don't really care what I think, so I'll tell you what Aristotle thinks. Aristotle says, nope. That's what I mean when I say citizens are dissimilar from each other. They're numerically equal by a democratic constitution, but as people, as persons, they come from different backgrounds, they have different sets of talents, they have different familial advantages. In the ancient world, that was hugely important. So no, for Aristotle, well, actually, for all of those Greek writers, they recognized a radical inequality in certain categories. Oh, but here's where I should say something that I said 13 months ago. The freedom and equality that I'm talking about when I talk about the ancient Greeks is political freedom and political equality. It means that you're free to participate in the assembly. It does not mean that you're free from other types of constraint. So what it means is that you cannot be prevented legally from going into the assembly, taking your seat and voting on policy, speaking publicly there. And so you see, that's quite a bit different than the freedom that we, I think we use freedom, as more all-embracing these days. And the same for equality. So Greek equality does not mean that everybody, it's not equality of outcomes in especially economics. It's not equality on all kinds of things, but it is equality on political participation. And it's expressed in so you're free to participate. You're equal in the sense that everybody has one single vote. So thank you, Ben. Oh, and then so Ben asks, have any schools done an experiment with a pool of people starting from ages 2 to 20, then observe if education can really make all people think and contemplate at a comparable level? If answer is yes, then democracy has a solid foundation. Otherwise, it's still questionable. Well, Ben, I would say that Aristotle and Herodotus would say, Herodotus would say that's a great experiment, and he has an example, kind of an Egyptian pharaoh doing that. But anyway, that's in the beginning of book 2, I believe, if you're interested in that, in Herodotus. But Aristotle explicitly says in another place in the Politics that because people are of all sorts, some are dumb and some are smart in different things. And because there's such a wide variety of what people know and what they're liable to say, Aristotle says, quoting an ancient Greek proverb, which comes from the Iliad, and that proverb is, when two are walking along together, one person sees it first. The point being is that the more sets of eyes that you have walking down the path, whatever needs to be seen will be seen by one of them before the other one. And Aristotle generalizes and says that deliberation among several people, all contributing to the deliberation and deferring to each other when appropriate, that's a way of paving over the inadequacy of any particular person. You know what? And in fact, now that I'm yammering on about it, Ben, I realized that Herodotus would also say that's the problem, and Sophocles would say that's the problem with autocracy. You just have one guy at the top, and whichever way he thinks it's should be, whichever way he thinks reality is. That's the way that's put into practice, even if he's surrounded by people who disagree and who see the truth. So thank you, Ben. Jim Rice asked, oh, hey, Jim, why would a successful democracy depend on its citizens' capacity to think and contemplate equally? With all respect, Jim, I think I hope I answered that just now by paraphrasing Aristotle on the benefits of deliberation in a group. Let's see. Actually, so we have a whole lot of questions from Ben and Jim. It says it's 1:21. I'm going to skip down to the next different name that I see, Jennifer Lind, who asks, what lessons can be drawn from these texts for understanding the current use of mercenaries in wars such as the current war in Ukraine? That's a really good question, Jennifer, because mercenaries were a big factor in ancient wars. Let's see now. I may not actually answer the question exactly as you're asking it, Jennifer, like what lessons can be learned, other than maybe the fact that mercenaries, they will, because Xerxes used mercenaries. They are a way of substituting. You substitute the reward, or let's put it this way: the carrot of money for the stick of the stick, I guess. So a mercenary is not someone you need to whip to fight for you, but paying them is enough. I think that if Aristotle or Herodotus were here, or Sophocles, because he was a general in the rest of his life, if they were here with us today, Jennifer, I think that they would say one problem with mercenaries is if they think they're going to lose, they're not going to fight to the death, because if they're going to lose, then why you might not pay them. You know, like you will have paid them a bit along the way. But Xerxes, or I should say Herodotus's point, is that citizens of self-governing polities will fight to the death against overwhelming odds. Mercenaries are already weighing costs and benefits. The money is worth the risk. So I will go, fight for, well, you mentioned Ukraine. So who is it? The Wagner group, or the Wagner group, by the guy that hacked the election. Or who are the other ones? The Chechens, they also have one. But yeah, so I think you could probably count on mercenaries to cut and run or skedaddle when the going got too tough. Let's see. And then Ezra Serkand asks, I just mean to suggest that when we speak of freedom in the Greek sense, the freedom of being a Greek citizen, there's a bit of a leap to the modern liberal citizen. True. You have to account, of course, in the West for the rise of European monarchy, autocracy, religious empire, etc., before you get the rise of the nation state and English liberalism. It seems to me the modern liberal is not necessarily a free subject in the way that the Greek citizen was. What is protected now seems not to be necessarily a citizen and the demos, but the state of private property and the private citizen. Yeah, there's not really a question there. Thank you, Esra, for that. If I may be so bold, Esra, you might find things that would interest you in my former First Friday lecture. Let's see here. So it's 1:24, so I'm going to scroll back up and see what Ben Yang and Jim Rice were asking. So let's see here, we go there, and then Jim said that. Oh, so Ben asked at 12:44, was Athens successful enough when it sentenced Socrates to death? Well, now they, the line on that is that they regretted doing so very, very soon after that. So they rued the decision. And then Jim says, Jim's answering Ben for me. Thanks, Jim. And then can I go down? I'm looking for a question. Oh, so Ben asked, is Socrates' willingness to die really an acceptance of, or instead, is Socrates' willingness to die really an acceptance of, or instead, but a powerful rejection to the Athenian democracy? At least Socrates said to all, I go to die, you go to live. Who is better off? Only God knows. And in the Credo, which we also read in the basic program in the fall, the Credo, Socrates explains that his willingness to die was he's accepting the Constitution of Athens. He says it's a bad verdict. It's an unjust verdict, but it's unjust for me not to follow the verdict. So that's the way he explains it in terms. And in fact, I almost used the credo in today's lecture to talk about these values. Then Jim asks, your argument is that if sufficiently aged, one just gives up. I think Jim means that Ben's argument. Okay, so we'll pass on to that. And then I think that brings us to the end of the questions. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming. Thanks for your attention.
Thanks so much, Kendall. And I will unmute it. Make sure everybody can unmute. So if people want to unmute themselves and applaud, feel free.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you. Thanks, Kendall.
Thanks everybody for coming. My face is getting hot.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody. Go forth and be free and equal.
Okay.
Thanks, Jim.
I love that picture of the conspirators in the graves. I hadn't seen that before.
It's kind of new. That was 2016 is when they dug those guys up.
Wow, that's very cool.
Yeah, they're it's not certain that they're but the date is right. So
Okay.
if it's not those conspirators,